I was discriminated against all my life because of my golden child brother. And finally, I got my revenge on my wedding day. I grew up in a family where favoritism wasn't just obvious, it was practically engraved into the walls of our home. My parents adored my older brother Adam. He was their perfect son, their pride and joy, the one they believed would achieve greatness. Meanwhile, I, Evelyn, was the afterthought. Adam was always the golden child. He could do no wrong in their eyes. If he got in trouble at school, it was the teacher's fault. If he broke something, it was probably me who provoked him. When I excelled in school, my parents barely acknowledged it. But if Adam so much as breathed near a trophy, it was celebrated like the second coming of Christ. Birthdays? Oh, Adam had extravagant parties with dozens of guests, elaborate themes, and expensive gifts. Mine? If I was lucky, I'd get a store-bought cake and a generic happy birthday from my parents before they went back to doting on Adam. It wasn't just birthdays. My parents made it painfully clear that Adam's needs, dreams, and happiness mattered far more than mine. I was the second-place child in a race I never signed up for. But I kept my head down, worked hard, and dreamed of the day I could escape the toxic environment I was forced to call home. The moment that shattered what little hope I had of my parents ever changing was when I turned 18. I had saved up for years to buy a used car so I could be independent. I worked part-time jobs while studying, barely sleeping, just so I could afford something for myself. The day I planned to buy my car, my parents sat me down and told me Adam needed a reliable vehicle since he had just gotten a job. And since family helps family, they decided I would give him my savings. I refused. They didn't take no well. My parents took my money anyway. They went behind my back and transferred my savings to Adam. And what did Adam do? He smirked, thanked them, and drove off in my car without a single ounce of guilt. That was the day I knew I would never be their priority. I would never matter. I promised myself that one day I would make them regret every single moment they made me feel like I was nothing. But revenge? I didn't even need to plan it. Fate handed it to me on a silver platter years later. Despite everything, I built a life for myself. It wasn't easy. I had to fight for every inch of progress. I worked multiple jobs while attending college, often surviving on caffeine and sheer determination. There were nights I fell asleep on my textbooks, and mornings when I wondered if I would ever be free from the shadow of my parents' favoritism. I didn't have anyone to fall back on, no supportive phone calls, no encouraging visits. While other students had their families cheering them on at graduation, I knew mine wouldn't bother showing up. And I was right. On the day I graduated with honors, I stood alone in my cap and gown, watching other families celebrate with hugs and flowers. My parents, nowhere to be found. They hadn't even acknowledged it. Meanwhile, Adam had recently gotten a promotion at his job, and my mother called me that morning not to congratulate me, but to gush about how proud she was of him. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit, but I refused to let it break me. Instead, I pushed forward, determined to create a future that was mine alone. And that's when I met Daniel. It happened in the most unexpected way. I had just landed my first full-time job at a marketing firm, and one evening, after a long and grueling workday, I stopped by a coffee shop. I was exhausted, juggling my laptop and a folder full of documents while trying to order my drink. In my rush, I ended up knocking over a cup of someone's coffee. That someone was Daniel. I expected him to be annoyed. Most people would have been. But instead, he just actually laughed, and handed me a napkin. "Rough day?" he asked, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. I nodded, mortified. "You have no idea. Tell you what," he said. "You buy me another coffee, and I won't hold a grudge." I chuckled, feeling my stress ease just a little. Deal. That one small accident turned into a conversation, then another, then dinner. And before I knew it, I had fallen in love. Daniel was everything I had never known I needed. Where my family had been cold, he was warm. Where they had dismissed me, he listened. Where they had ignored my achievements, He celebrated every single one. He would remember the smallest details about me, how I liked my tea, the way I scrunched my nose when I was deep in thought, how certain songs could instantly lift my mood. He made me feel seen, truly seen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't competing for affection. I wasn't fighting to be enough. With Daniel, I just was, and that was enough for him. One night, as we lay on the couch, watching some silly movie neither of us was really paying attention to, he turned to me and said, "You know, you deserve everything good in this world." I laughed softly. "You might be biased," he shook his head. "No, I'm serious. You deserve love, happiness, and a family that adores you. And if your family can't see that, then they don't deserve you." His words struck something deep inside me. Because for the first time, I believed them. A few years into our relationship, Daniel proposed. It was simple, heartfelt, and completely us. We were on a weekend getaway in a cozy cabin, sitting by the fireplace, drinking hot cocoa. No grand gestures, no over-the-top speeches, just Daniel, looking at me with those deep, loving eyes as he pulled out a ring and said, "I don't want a life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, yes. 1,000 times yes. It was the happiest moment of my life. And then, my parents, who had ignored me for years, suddenly became interested in my life again. The moment word got out that I was engaged, my mother, who barely acknowledged my existence before, was suddenly blowing up my phone. She called me 6 times in one day. When I finally answered, she was brimming with fake enthusiasm. "Oh, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us you were engaged? Family should be the first to know." Family. Now I was family. It was the event. The chance to play the role of loving parents in front of an audience. The opportunity to use my wedding as their social status booster. And worse, I knew exactly what they were thinking. They expected Adam to have a major role. Probably as best man. I clenched my jaw, gripping my phone tightly. This wasn't about love, this was about control. And I refused to let them have it. A week later, I agreed to meet my parents for dinner, mostly out of curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, a part of me still hoped they had changed. Spoiler, they hadn't. The entire conversation revolved around Adam. "How can we not have Adam in the wedding party?" my mother said indignantly. "He's your brother. He should be the best man. He's Daniel's best man." I asked with mock innocence. She scoffed. "No, of course not. But you can have 2. It's only fair." Fair? Where was fairness when they stole my savings? Where was fairness when they ignored me my entire life? I took a deep breath, forcing a polite smile. "I appreciate your input," I said, voice calm but firm. "But Daniel and I have everything planned. We'll be keeping the wedding small and intimate." My mother's lips thinned. My father stayed quiet. And Adam? He had the audacity to smirk. "You always were selfish," he muttered. I turned to him, my patience finally snapping. "And you always took whatever you wanted," I shot back. "But not this time." My mother gasped. My father looked at me like I had just insulted the family name, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was standing my ground. Little did they know, my real revenge was yet to come. And it would be glorious. A month before my wedding, my worst fears came true. I overheard a conversation between my mother and Adam. They were discussing how to make my wedding about him. Adam wanted to propose to his girlfriend at my wedding. My mother, she encouraged it. "Everyone will already be there," she gushed. "It'll be perfect." I saw red. I had endured years of being cast aside, ignored, and treated like an afterthought. But this? They wanted to turn my special day into another celebration of Adam. No, not this time. I smiled to myself because, for the first time in my life, I had the power. And I was about to use it. I kept quiet. I let them think they had won. I let my mother believe she was in control. And then the wedding day came. Everything was perfect. The venue, the decorations, the guests, it was the dream wedding I had always wanted. But then, just as I expected, right after the cake cutting, Adam stood up. He clinked his glass, drawing everyone's attention. I watched as he pulled out a ring box and turned to his girlfriend, grinning. But before he could say a single word, I stood up first. "Actually," I said, grabbing the microphone, "I have a special announcement to make." Adam froze. My mother's face twisted in confusion. I smiled sweetly. "I just want to take a moment to thank my wonderful in-laws for always treating me with love and respect, something my own family never did." A few gasps echoed through the room. My parents stiffened. Daniel squeezed my hand in silent support as I continued. "My parents never cared about me growing up. They stole from me, ignored me, and made it clear I would never be as important as Adam." Silence. Utter, deafening silence. I turned to Adam. "And you," I said, my voice sharp as glass, "are the worst of them all. You have taken from me my entire life. But today is my day." I turned to Adam's girlfriend. "And before you agree to marry him, maybe you should know that Adam wanted to propose to you today, not out of love, but because he wanted to steal my spotlight, just like he's done my whole life." The color drained from her face. I could see the gears turning in her head as she looked at Adam in horror. Guests whispered among themselves, eyes darting between my parents and Adam, their judgment evident. I turned back to my parents, my voice cold. "You always told me that family helps family," I said. "Well, let me return the favor. Since you love Adam so much, you can have him. Because after today, I have no family." And with that, I walked away. The wedding continued without them. My parents stormed out, humiliated beyond belief. Adam's girlfriend? She dumped him on the spot, furious that he would try to use her as a prop for his selfishness. As for me, I had never felt so free. I had spent years being their shadow, their afterthought. But on my wedding day, I finally got my revenge. And I never looked back.